mountains, and I'm up really high, over about 5,000 feet, that question. So that being said, let me ask, first of all, tell you, what is altitude sickness? Well, young animals and humans, if they're climbing to high altitudes, the concentration of oxygen becomes much less the higher you go. So typically you don't really have a problem with it from about 3,000 or 4,000 feet, but you definitely do from anywhere from about 5,000 feet up and above. So what can happen there, especially for dogs, is that the fact that they run around a lot more than we do. You know, when I'm going up a mountain, the side of a mountain, especially with an incline about like this, I'm going pretty slow. I don't go very fast. I take my time. I stop for a breather. I stop and rehydrate. But if I let Captain just go full steam, he would run 100 miles an hour, circling me, just making it look like it's a piece of cake to go up the side of that mountain. So therefore, they can succumb to altitude sickness a lot faster than humans can. And when they do, what happens is that their throat, the lining of their throat becomes inflamed and it swells, making them gasp for air. And when they gasp for air, that can create a cascade effect that can eventually lead to fluid on the brain, or brain swelling, I should say, fluid in their lungs, and also it can finally reach to cardiac arrest. So it's pretty serious. You really do have to keep an eye on it anytime you're hiking, especially at those upper elevations. So, you know, what are the symptoms of it? Well, the first symptoms are really hard to discern at any given moment because, you know, they claim it's a racing heart for a dog. It's panting, it's drooling. Well, that's me. I'm just going to be honest with you. When I'm going up a really steep incline, depending on the speed in which I'm going, that's me. My heart's racing. I'm panting, probably drooling at the same time. So those are not as easy to recognize. The symptoms that are far more easy to recognize, and the ones that I've noticed in my dogs in the past, is probably the best one I could just even tell you would be, you know, if your dog seems like out of sorts. I know I've had altitude sickness myself more than a few times. And when I've had it, when you don't have enough oxygen, things start to slow down. And maybe you're not slowing down, but your brain is. Simple task like fastening your backpack back on, hooking up your chest strap or your waist strap, or just screwing on the top of your canteen. All of those can be extremely difficult, and you feel like you're doing it in slow motion. You feel like an outer body experience. Well, the same thing happens for our dogs. If you notice your dog starting to stagger, it literally walk into trees. I had a dog do that, literally walk straight on, head first, right into a tree. If they just seem out of sort, then more than likely they could be suffering from the effects of altitude sickness. Another thing to look for is if you see that, then go to secondary symptoms. I'll check their gums. If their gums are pale, then that means we're not getting enough good blood circulation at that time where it should be happening. Also, another thing that I typically look for is a bleeding nose. Now, of course, the dog that walked dead smack into the tree couldn't really tell was the bleeding nose from the altitude or was it because of the fact that you walked dead smack in front of the tree. A persistent cough. So all of these things, not just gasping, but coughing, a nosebleed. Your dog seems out of sorts. Any of these things, these can all be indications of altitude sickness. And the really sad thing about altitude sickness is it's totally preventable if you just don't go too high too fast. And so many dogs do succumb to it because we're racing to the top. We're like in this great adventure race, and we want to get to the top faster than anyone else. So a couple things that you can do to make sure that your dog doesn't succumb to altitude sickness. Number one, before I even start climbing a mountain, anytime I'm out in the wild with my dog, the very first thing I do is I look up all of the emergency clinics, all the emergency veterinary clinics that are nearby. I want to know where they are, their address, their contact information. Make sure you have that on you somewhere. Always have that. Make sure they're emergency vets because they tend to be open 24 hours a day. Also, make sure that you stop and you hydrate frequently. These upper altitudes, it's a lot cooler than it is at lower altitudes. So we don't really sweat as much, but we start to exert ourselves, and when we do that, we do a lot of breathing. We're going to breathe out that moisture, and we become hydrated very quickly. And that can set in because you're just not thinking about drinking because it's not hot. Make sure that you do stop and drink frequently, and make sure every time you drink, make sure your dog takes a drink as well. Also, if you're going to be going to altitudes above 5,000 feet, try to spend the day at about 5,000, 4,000 to 5,000 feet. Spend the day there, allowing your body to acclimate, and the same thing goes for your dog. Only these Sherpas who have been climbing Mount Everest about 100 times in their lifetime can go straight to the top. All the rest of us, if we try to attempt that, we would die. We have to have oxygen. We have to acclimate, base camps and a higher camp. You have to do that for a reason, to allow your body to acclimate to those higher altitudes. Go slow. Again, typically, you don't have to worry about that. The inclines like this in rocky terrain has its own governor on your speed. But your four-legged dog, oh no, they can go a lot faster than you can. Keep an eye on them. Don't let them go so fast. If you have to put them on a leash, put them on a leash. Slow them down. Control their ascent. Please do that. Gosh, I cannot tell you how many times I've just seen dogs succumb to this when it's not really, it's something that is incredibly avoidable. Also, those of you that own the brachycephalic breeds, the ones with the smushed noses, boxers, pugs, Boston Terriers, all of those, English Bulldogs, those dogs have a difficult time breathing down at sea level, let alone at altitude. I would really avoid taking those type of dogs with me on high altitude hikes. Anything, like I said, underneath about 3,000 or 4,000 feet, you'd probably be fine. You just have to keep an eye on them more so than any other breed that you would take into the mountains. It's just about awareness, like a lot of things with our dogs. It's so cool to be able to go out into the wild with your dog. You want to let them off leash. You want to let them run. I mean, Captain runs and he sleeps for literally for days afterwards. It's so cool. It's cool on the heart, cool for your dog. But again, I've been out in the wild most of my life, and I've had many dogs in the wild, and I've almost lost a couple of them due to altitude sickness. Almost lost yours truly to altitude sickness more than a few times. You got to take it serious, guys. So if you're going to head out here as soon as everything clears up a little bit, or even if it doesn't clear up, you notice me. There's nothing within 6 feet of me, trust me. Nothing but this big old mountain up here behind me. See if I can show you guys a little bit here. Well, that's pretty kind of cool there. It's pretty surreal there when I tilt that camera a little bit this way and that way. But absolutely beautiful. There's nothing here but me, Captain, and my wife. So having a great time. I headed back into town tomorrow. Just need a couple days, couple little breather moments here. And then we'll be headed back, batteries recharged, ready to go. Okay, guys, if you have any questions about altitude sickness, please send them my way. Do try to get out into the wild. And if you do, just keep an eye on your dog. Hydrate, go slow, acclimate, and if you seem out of sorts or if your dog seems out of sorts, shut it down right then, baby. Shut it down and start backing down. Get down that mountain a little ways. That summit is still going to be there, trust me. It's not going anywhere. That thing's still going to be there. All right, man. I'll check you guys out tomorrow. Until then, be safe wherever you are. And also, if you found this information beneficial to you, please share it. Okay, guys, take care.